My name is Rosa. I'm the Permit Department Manager in Heavy Haul. And what we have here is the permit book for each of the drivers. It goes with each of the heavy haul trucks, and we'll be going through this book. When you're assigned your permit tech, the first thing you'll do is, after they assign you a truck, is you're going to look for this permit book, bring it into your permit tech, and they're always going to make sure that you have the latest and the greatest of all the provisional sheets in this book. It'll have your name and phone number on it so that if the book is ever misplaced or lost, then they could either call you if they find it, or you can let your permit tech know we're going to get you one right away. All the provision sheets in this book validate both a single trip permit or an annual permit. So if you don't have the provisional attachment sheets that go along with those, it invalidates your permit. So it's important that you have the provision sheets that go along with it, and they are the most accurate, latest, and greatest that the states have. So we're going to go through kind of basically each of the states. The only difference between a driver book and this book is I have examples of the state permits in the book and kind of go over any of the quirks each of the states have. So the first one is Alabama. Their provision sheet is referred to as rules and regulations. Whatever label that the states want to give it, it's the same thing. It's a provisional sheets. What are the rules regarding oversized, overweight permits that each of the states say that in order for you to travel to through the states, you have to abide by? In addition to the rules and regulations, you have to have what's referred to as an Alabama letter if you're running on an Alabama annual. Anytime a driver qualifies for an annual permit, we'll order that annual permit at the time. Most of the states will allow us to send an annual permit directly to the truck. We don't have to have the original anymore, where we used to have to pre-order them. The only quirk with Alabama is they do require that you print it in color. So if you don't have color ink for your printer, then we would need to overnight this to you. The Alabama letter, all that is permanent or long-term restrictions within the state of Alabama, and that's only updated as these restrictions, either they add to those or they take them off, they finally complete them. So this hasn't updated in a while. This is what a single trip Alabama permit looks like. It actually has the routing on it. When you are looking at your permit, it's the driver's responsibility. If the permit tech doesn't catch it, we're looking for any kind of potential mistakes. Double check your truck and trailer information. Make sure it's not only your truck, but also your trailer. A lot of these states will allow us to save truck information into the state, but that particular truck could have been pulling a different trailer at the time it was stored to that state. So make sure it's your truck and trailer information. Double check the width, height, length. Make sure that somewhere on your permit it refers to weight if you have an overweight permit. If it just says legal, that means you're running on a legal weight permit, and we just missed the box that says you're overweight. So make sure you double check that. In your routing, make sure that if you see something that refers to as city streets or county roads, that your permit tech has told you that we double check to make sure if an additional permit was required for that city or county road. States only care about state routes. It's the only thing they hold jurisdiction over. That would be interstates, U.S. highways, or state highways, state routes. So the city and county roads are held jurisdiction by those particular cities or counties, and it's our responsibility as permit techs to see if you're required to have any additional permits in addition to the state permit or the annual permit that you're running on. So if we miss it, it was added into your routing, we didn't say anything, make sure you're asking about that also. This is just an example of an Arkansas permit. Their provisions actually come on the state permit itself. So if you're wanting to know anything about curfew area, curfew times, times of travel, escort requirements, it's going to be listed on the permit itself. This is an Arizona milepost map. Arizona refers to everything by milepost, so we would be doing one of two types of permits for you. It would either be a single trip permit with your route on it, or it would be an open route permit that just says various state and federal highways. If we do an open route permit, then we are going to send you a copy of the restrictions for that week for the state, and they would say that on the restrictions list, any sort of restrictions that's affecting your route would be listed by milepost. That's why we have the milepost map. If you're running on an open route permit or an annual permit, your permit tech would be telling you what your route is anyway to make sure that according to your dimensions and the weight of your load that you are cleared to take that particular route. And we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page in regards to what route we're traveling on. This is California state provisional sheets. On a California permit, either a single trip permit or an annual permit, it states what all the provision attachments that are required for those particular permits, and that's this stuff here, so we don't have to keep sending it over and over with each type of permit. For our 5 and 6 axle guys, 6 axle with a trailer no larger than 48 feet, we would be getting an annual permit. California is one of those states that require that you carry the original annual, so we would have to pre-order those. If you're running on a California annual, in addition to that annual permit, you would have to have the weekly California restrictions that go along with it. Most cities and counties within the state of California honor the state provision sheets as theirs. LA County does not, so we just automatically put one in your book. This is what the Colorado permits used to look like. This is now what they look like. Their provisions, just like Arkansas, come on the permit itself, so if you wanted to read ahead, the provisions are basically the same, or you can wait until you get your permit and read about it, whatever it is that you're questioning on there. This is Connecticut. That's what a Connecticut permit looks like. Delaware is another state. The provisions come on the permit itself. This is a Florida single trip permit. One thing about Florida is they will max out your dimensions if you do not exceed what the state limits are, so it might be kind of confusing to a driver when they first get their permit. Their permit will show that they're 14.6 wide. In reality, they're only 10'2" wide. That's why it happens. It's not the permit tech that did that. It's because Florida will max out your permit. We do get Florida annuals for our drivers. It's another one that we do have to pre-order. It comes on this yellowish type paper here, and it's for legal weight only covers dimension. But it's well worth the money spent on it. So we usually get those for the 5 axle guys, 6 axle step decks, or the 10 axle trailer length only permits. This is Florida provision sheets. This is Georgia provision sheet. Georgia truck routes, which is an attachment also to a Georgia annual. This one I copied in black and white, but it comes on blue color bar paper, so we do have to pre-order these Georgia annuals. The unique thing about the Georgia annual and New Mexico annual is they expire the same time frame as our company insurance, so they all expire on May 31st of each year, so we bulk order those at that time for both Georgia and New Mexico. Georgia annuals do cover overweight and over dimension. These are map attachments that go along with an Idaho annual, which we will get for all of our trucks. They're well worth the money. They're only $128, but it does cover a lot of over dimension and as much weight as you will ever carry through the state of Idaho, as long as you're not a super load. It gives us up to 15.6 high on the interstate and 16 feet wide on the interstate. So we have to have these map attachments that go along with it. This is where the pilot car requirements are. Vertical clearances, if you're hauling a load that's 15.6 high, you still qualify to run on your annual, this tells us where all the low bridges are. So we're looking up what your route is based on the color of the route to make sure you're not routed to any low bridges. And this is also within the city of Boise. This is a route capacity map. Because they give you so much weight allowance on your annual permit, doesn't give us access to all roads. According to the color of the road, tells us what each of the group weight allowances are for that road. If you exceed what the group weight allowance is for that road, it doesn't mean you can't travel on the road. It just means instead of an annual permit, we have to get you a single trip permit. Again, there's just a duplicate of Boise. And this would be kingpin restricted roads, where we would have to call in, make sure you can travel on that road and what the escort requirements are. This is an Idaho single trip permit, and the thing with Idaho is we always want to make sure once you exceed 12 feet wide that you have the extended mirrors. If we look at what the provisions state in regards to escort requirements, it says that you're not required to have a pilot car till you're over 13.6 wide, but it does have the statement disclosure on here that says mirrors must allow driver to see 200 feet behind the load. If not, rear pilot car is required. I always point that out to the drivers, and the permit techs will ask you once you exceed 12 feet wide if you have those extended mirrors. This is Illinois provision sheet. Illinois and Ohio are both two states that will sporadically double check to make sure you have the most current provision on hand. Ohio does require that you bring it in with your permit. This is an Illinois permit, Indiana provision sheet, and an Indiana permit. I'm just going to go through some of these. This is Iowa provision sheet. This is an Iowa annual permit, which we do get for our drivers. It is over dimension only, does not cover weight, but it gives you a lot of over dimension. And then this is an Iowa single trip permit. Kansas provision sheets and a Kansas permit. Kentucky's another state that puts the actual provisions on their permit itself. Louisiana provisions. Louisiana permit. Massachusetts. This is Maryland provisions. On the back of this Maryland provision is the Baltimore City provisions. Baltimore City permits will now come on your Maryland state permit. We don't have to request those separately. This is Michigan provision. Michigan permit. Minnesota permit. This is the Mississippi provisions, and unfortunately I forgot to put in my book, but we do carry a Mississippi annual that is specific to the company. It doesn't require us to get it for each individual truck. We can run all on the same Mississippi annual. It's another one that just covers over dimension, does not cover weight. And this is a Mississippi permit that has weight on it, single trip permit. This is a Missouri information sheet if you're looking for something in particular. This book here, it's upside down, is actually the provision sheets for the state of Missouri. This book is a requirement to those state permits. So what we did was took specific information so you didn't have to go through this entire book and put it on this sheet so you can look it up there. And what I usually tell drivers at this time is that if you have any questions about anything, to please call your permit tech. We have the same provision sheets that you do, or we have access to every single state telephone number. If we don't know what the answer to your question is, we are going to call somebody that can give us a definite answer. We're not ever going to say, well, I think this is what it is, because we don't want anybody getting a ticket on I think. This is Missouri permit. This is Montana red route map. These are the locations of what Montana refers to as red routes. It's additionally restricted routes. All Montana permits refer to red route restrictions. If you want to know if you're on a red route or not, you can look at this map, or you can call your permit tech, and it probably doesn't even refer to the route that you're on, but because it talks about red route restrictions, you want to make sure you're not on a red route. North Carolina permit. North Dakota permit. This is another informational sheet for Nebraska. Nebraska has Interstate 80 running east and west. 680 goes around the northwest side of Omaha, the only interstates that actually go through the state. So during construction season, generally during the summertime, they will route you off of Interstate 80 and most of the time up to US 30, which parallels Interstate 80, and they put these little L connecting routes in your route. And for instance, it would say Interstate 80 to L53C to US 30. You can look on here and see L53C is located at exit 8. So it's just an information sheet we did for you. That's an actual Nebraska permit. New Hampshire, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. The states hold jurisdiction over all the state routes, and of course city and county over the city and county routes, but they do not, either one of them, hold jurisdiction over any bridge crossings. So your permit will state on their telephone numbers to call for bridge crossing times or permits. Your permit tech will be handling that for you. If they don't give you your permit crossing times or your permit numbers, then make sure you question them about it. This is a copy of a New Mexico annual. It covers oversize and overweight. This is what I was talking about with the Georgia annuals also. They all expire on May 31st, but the New Mexico annuals are also limited to construction equipment only. That's a single trip New Mexico permit. Nevada provisions. This is a Nevada annual, and we get these for all of our trucks up to 9 axles. It covers weekend, night, and holiday travel and gives you quite a bit of weight. This is a Nevada single trip permit with a route on it. This is the New York permit. Ohio provision sheet, and for the guys who've been driving for a while, Ohio used to state that if you wanted to be routed through a truck stop to shut down or fuel, it had to be in your routing, and that is no longer the case. This is an Ohio permit. Oklahoma. This is an Oregon single trip permit. Down here in this section lists all the attachments that go with the single trip permit. This is an unladen annual permit, and it has additional attachments like the single trip permit. And this is an Oregon annual permit that has weight and over dimension on it. We get those for our 5 and 6 axle guys. The weight limit is 98,000 pounds. And these are all the Oregon attachments that are referred to in this section here. These are the weight table limits for the routing. Your 70A, 82A, 100A, all the attachments that's referred to on those permits, and we will go over all those attachments and what they mean as it pertains to your route. This is Pennsylvania insurance. The state of Pennsylvania requires that you carry insurance specific to the state. Most of the time, the only time they're going to ask for it is if you're hauling a super load. This is Pennsylvania county map. Has all the counties listed on there, and then on the back of this county map would be the provision sheet, but they copied it separate from that. The unique thing with Pennsylvania is, in addition to curfew areas, urbanized areas, they also have school bus curfews during the school year. This is a Pennsylvania permit. On your routing, If you had issues trying to find a route, you could narrow it down by looking at the county map here to figure out where your route is located within that county and then find it on your map. But the best bet is to call your permit tech and ask them, and then they will tell you exactly where it is your route is located, how to get there. If at this point, I usually tell the drivers also, if you ever find yourself out of route, you missed your turn, Texas is notorious for routing you to exits that are blocked off, no longer existing, or there was a wreck and they're trying to detour you off. DOT holds jurisdiction over any permitted load. The State Highway Patrol does not. So what we need you to do is pull over to the safest place possible, or tell the State Highway Patrol, I need to check in with my permit department, make sure we contact the state to see if the detour you're telling me to take is okay according to my dimension, or we're going to call the state office and say my driver missed his turn or he turned too soon. This is where he's located now. How do you want us to get him back on route? We don't want to go on Google Earth and try to figure out a route to get you back on route without having the state involved, because we don't want to get you in a worse situation than you already are in, because A, you're off route already, and B, if you had a high load on, we don't want to route you to a low bridge, or if you had a heavy load on, we don't want to route you to a weight restricted bridge. That's why we always want to get the state involved. South Carolina provisions, South Carolina permit, South Dakota. This is Tennessee, Nashville, and Knoxville. No truck location maps. So it states where the trucks are not allowed to travel on certain routes, both for Nashville and Knoxville, because if you are no greater than 12 foot wide, 13.6 high, or have a kingpin that's no greater than 51 feet, your permit's just going to simply state that you're coming in from Arkansas, going out to Mississippi, and your routes will be listed as non-applicable. Once you exceed any of those limits, then they'll actually put the route on your permit. So this driver was 14 feet high, that's why he got his route on his permit. We're always going to tell you what your route is, but the state of Tennessee wants to make sure that the driver is well aware of where the no truck location routes are in those two cities. This is a Texas permit. This is Utah provisions. We do get Utah annuals for our driver. That's another one that is over dimension only, does not cover weight. Utah is another state that will max out your dimensions. Again, if you're only 10 foot too wide, you'll get your permit. It'll say that you're 14.6 wide. Utah and Washington are the only two states that say we don't care what the face of your permit states, we care what you physically measure out to be. So if you show up to pick up a load and you were supposed to get a dozer with a blade attached, so they went ahead and had us permit you at 14.6 wide, you show up and they took the blade off, so you're actually only 10 foot 6 wide, we don't have to get you another permit. For Utah and Washington only. They say that they only go according to what you physically measure out to be. Any other state states that we go according to what the face of your permit says. So Maryland, for instance, if it said that you are 14.6 wide, we either need to get you a new permit or we have to make sure that you have your escorts with you, because that's the requirement on the permit. Virginia single trip permit. There's the Washington page 3 and page 4 of a Washington permit. It actually talks about curfew areas. If we do not have something that shows us curfew areas, or in the provision sheets, if it doesn't talk about curfews or your permit itself does not talk about curfews, we cannot tell you conclusively yes or no if you're in a curfewed area. Are always going to tell you, yes, you're in a curfewed area unless you can tell us otherwise. We don't want to mistakenly give you wrong information and find out you are in a curfew area and now you're getting a ticket. And so we're always going to tell you yes unless we have something that can show us otherwise. This is a Washington single trip permit. I don't have a copy of it here, but we will also do Washington open route permits just like the Arizona had one. This is a Wisconsin single trip permit. West Virginia provisions, West Virginia permit. Multi-state or Western regional permits, we don't do at combined. But if you are hauling for John Deere, T-Check is permitting your load. If you are hauling for Case New Holland, Transport Permits is permitting your load. They've hired a particular trucking company, this case would be combined, to haul their loads, but they have hired those two permitting agencies to permit 100% of their loads no matter who is hauling for us. So we would be doing 100% of the legwork, dimensions, route of travel, start times, weight distributions. We have to submit it to those two particular permitting agencies. They submit to the states, they get them back from the states, send them to us, then we send them to our drivers. So there's a lag in permits for, could be a couple of hours, whereas you would get your permits right away from your permit tech, and that's why. It's just those two permitting companies. They do Western regional or multi-state permits. It would be a Montana, Idaho, Washington permit, all on one permit. Combined does individual state permits. This sections here are very important to the drivers. It's information that we've taken out of each of the states and made subcategories to make certain things easier to find. So the first section is overhang heights and blades. You have a load, you are legal width, legal height, legal length, but you have 6 feet of rear overhang. Do you need a permit or not? This is how we're going to find out. We're going to go and look up your route of travel and see what the state requirements on what they say is legal overhang before a permit is required. The next section is weekend travel restrictions. No consistency between the states. This is going to tell us which state is going to shut you down so you know how to pre-plan your trip and we know when to start additional permits. This is section here is escort requirements, and right below it they also put the weekend travel restrictions to make it easier on the escort locator. It could be your width, your height, or your length that required you to have a pilot car. It could be the fact that you're starting on 2 lanes versus 4 lanes. This is how we're figuring out what the requirements are. Okay, this is the maximum weight limits. Every state broken down individually. The first line you're going to see here is if I'm 80,000 pounds or less, what can I have according to my axles and still be considered legal? So for instance, Alabama says 34 on 2 or 42 on 3. So I'm 80,000 pounds. I have 42,000 on my Triton, 31,000 on my Tandem, 11 on my Steer. Am I still considered legal? Yes, you are, because their limit is 42. The second line is what are the maximum amount of weights allowable for that state. So Alabama says 44 on 2, 66 on 3. This is how we're going to determine from origin to destination that you are going to be 100% compliant. We want you to be able to go in and get loaded, especially if it's craned on, and not have to worry about changing the route, having an issue where you're going for your destination. For instance, Oklahoma, maximum limit on 2 is 40. We don't want you loading in Florida, getting outside the Oklahoma line and finding out you have 42 on your tandems. So we're always paying attention to your routing. This is how we're determining that you are 100% compliant. And then the very last thing is going to be your port of entry telephone numbers for Utah and Wyoming. Utah, you don't necessarily need those unless the Utah system has crashed and we were unable to get you a permit. I'm going to repeat this several times. Do not ever go into Wyoming without calling the port of entry for your authorization to enter the state, because you will get a ticket. These are each of the locations according to your route of travel and their phone numbers. Again, do not ever go into the state without calling for your authorization, because you will get a ticket. And that's the end of your permit book. The only thing that I'm going to address now is when you get your load, your permit tech is always going to be 500 miles ahead of you at all times. So when you show up to pick up your load, you'll have permits waiting for you. We can adjust your width, your height, your weight anytime after that, but we don't want to hold up a driver by having that driver waiting on permits. That's why we always are 500 miles ahead of you at all times. Please call your permit tech as soon as you get loaded with those dimensions. Send them through your OBC. And then make sure, even if you have a legal weight load, that you are weighing your load, because you could have a load that is under gross and over axle, and over axle is an overweight load. Double check everything on your permits, and other than that, that's the end.